We are reading Dragonfruit by Makiia Lucier, and it is chapter 5. Captain Bragadin snatched the spyglass from her hand. A string of curses erupted as he peered out the window. Moa and Vea ran over. More cursing followed. The sea dragons were directly behind the ship, halfway between the anemone and the lagoon. One blue, one green, the latter with a rose frill, the color of the heart flower. Hanali watched with growing dread as they circled the anemone in a wide arc. The second time they swam around, the arc had grown smaller. Closer. They're hungry, Hanali and Captain Bragadin said at the same time. They exchanged a look of mutual dislike and grudging respect. However, much as she despised him, there was no denying the captain knew the Nomi Sea like the back of his hand. The Nomi and the creatures within, especially these creatures. The ark would grow even smaller, Hanali knew, and then, if nothing was done to deter them, they would surround the ship and squeeze until the hull cracked and the forecastle collapsed and the sailors fell one by one into the sea. Open jaws, wide, awaiting mouths. There were calls from the deck directed up at the forecastle asking for orders. No one sounded panicked. This was a dragoner after all. Dragon hunting was their livelihood. Moa headed for the door. I'll get the harpoons. What about fire? There was a catapult on the roof of the forecastle. There would be incendiaries stored beside it in a waterproof box. Fire bombs, a forerunner's invention, adapted for life at sea. No fire. Captain Bragadin turned in a slow circle, following the sea dragon's path through the open shutters. The spyglass fell, forgotten, from his hand. Hanali caught it before it hit the floor. I won't risk that dragon. Moa stopped. Captain, it's the dragons or us, I think. Hanali had been looking through the spyglass. The lagoon's captain must have realized the sea dragons were preparing to feed. It was sailing away. No help would be coming from that direction. Hanali could see the lagoon's crew gathered together, turned their way. The yellow-haired captain, Augustus, stood at the center, his own spyglass trained on them. Another figure appeared by his side, much smaller, delicate, wearing a red dress. Augustus gave her the spyglass. Hanali said, There's an old woman on that ship. She's wearing a crown. What? Captain Bragadin grabbed the spyglass. Who? Vea leaned out a window, squinting. Augusta, Captain Bragadin said after a very long moment. His grandmother. Grandmother? Moa asked at a loss. Who brings their mai on a dragon hunting ship? Captain Bragadin did not answer. His spyglass remained on the other ship, which was making good headway, putting more distance between it and the dragons. As for them, the anemone had begun to rock as the sailors below raced from rail to rail, watching the sea dragons draw closer. Hey, someone shouted, why are we just standing here scratching our... With a snarl, Captain Bragadin broke the spyglass in two and flung the pieces at the wall. He ran out of the forecastle and from the top of the steps shouted, All of you, shut your mouths. Silence fell instantly. Get below and not a sound out of you. We are mice here, do you understand? Invisible. Now go. There was a rush for the hatch. Rattled, Hanali watched what looked to be a whirlpool forming around the anemone. It would have been fascinating to witness had she not also been aboard. The hatch slammed shut and a quiet fell over the ship. It was a good idea, pretending to be a ghost ship. Sometimes sea dragons would swim past a quiet vessel, uninterested. But these dragons were hungry and determined. They circled closer. Silence was not going to work, and by the look on the captain's face, he knew it too. Captain Bragadin stared straight out the back of the ship, hands clasped behind his back. Moa. Captain? 2 firebombs, Captain Bragadin ordered. Hanali wrapped both arms around herself. It's the dragons or us, Moa had said. It did not make her feel any less wretched knowing what had to be done. Moa did not bother to hide his relief. He ran for the door, then froze when the captain added, Aim for the lagoon. 3 sets of eyes turned to the captain, disbelieving. Bragadin, Vea said, her voice strained. That's the king's son, the king's mother. Kill the dragons, Hanali began. Captain? Are you still here, Moa? Captain Bragadin spoke quietly, every word a warning. A muscle bunched along Moa's jaw. He swung around and left. They stood side by side, the 3 of them, Hanali, Vea, Captain Bragadin, listening to the dragons hissing, and the water churned and foamed. Moa pounded up the outer steps to the forecastle roof. A terrible creaking sound followed, the catapult swinging into position. And finally, a single heavy thump as the first incendiary was dropped into place. The first bomb sailed across the water. It hit the lagoon's stern and sent splintered wood and human bodies flying. Even from this distance, Hanley could see one of them wore a red dress. The second bomb landed directly atop the forecastle, and within minutes the Esperanza's ship was no more. It was not until Captain Bragadin released a breath that she realized the hissing had stopped and the churning had receded. Both sea dragons had abandoned them, swimming toward the more convenient meal. There were people among the debris, arms flailing. The sound of screams carried over open water. Honolly made herself watch, made herself remember the details, though she did not believe, deep down, that she would ever have the chance to bear witness to what she is seeing. And when she heard Vea's words, the captain's words, she knew. "You fool," Vea said softly. "You think you're invincible, but you go too far this time. We'll hang for this." Captain Bragadin stiffened at the word fool, and Honolly reached for the dragon's scale on her back, braced for more violence. But all he said was, "Only if we're caught. Only if someone tells." Chapter 6. They locked Honolly in her cabin for the rest of the day and night. Long hours stretched before her. Sometimes she paced, which was unsatisfying in this small box of a room. Sometimes she lay on the mat, staring at the wall and wondering how might I get off this ship. One bright spot, no one had come to remove her wash tub. It remained shoved against the door, offering a small measure of comfort and safety. At times, her pacing was more of a stagger, for they had sailed straight into the unwelcoming arms of a typhoon. The anemone rocked wildly. It dipped and swayed, shuddered and creaked. From the shouting above deck, she suspected one or two dragoners had fallen overboard and been lost. Mercifully, they must have caught the typhoon at her tail end. The waters and winds were violent but brief, and by the time Honolly settled into a troubled sleep, the worst of the storm had passed. Occasionally, however, sleep came with its own storms. She dreamt of Princess Oleana and an evening lesson, and poison. "Kalama," Princess Oleana had prompted from across the table. She wore a long green dress without sleeves. Tattooed on her arm from shoulder to elbow was the image of a sleeping fruit bat. Kalama was too simple, Honolly thought. A 5-year-old would know the answer. She was 8. Kalama is a trickster god, the goddess of deception and chaos. There's an island to the east named for her. And? And she's creator of earthquakes, typhoons, great waves, and... Here Honolly stopped and think about it. Volcanoes? It had become their ritual when it was just the two of them. The lessons of the day would continue into supper. Honolly had served as Princess Oleana's page for 3 years, a great honor. They sat at a table by an open window on the island of Garapan. 3 weeks had gone by since they'd begun their journey, visiting the various villages and islands of the Tamarindi archipelago. Tomorrow they would start for home. Yes, volcanoes, very good. And whom does Kalama favor? Princess Oleana brought her spoon to her lips. She was, in Honolly's opinion, the most beautiful person on Tamarind. No, the entire Nomi Nomi. Her face was narrow, with sharp slashing cheekbones, reminding Honolly of the great statues that stood on the southern edge of the island. The scar on Princess Oli's right cheek resembled a fishhook. She refused to have it tended to, ignoring the unguents and lotions prepared by royal healers. The scar reminded her of her husband, she would say, and of the battle that had wounded her and cost his life. She would not erase that memory. Her hair fell to her knees, waves the color of lava stones, polished and shiny. One day, when Honolly was 18, and not 8, she would have her hair that long and that shiny. Kalama favors those of bad character, Honolly answered. Mostly thieves, pirates, spies, and Lady Iosefina. Princess Oleana lowered her spoon. Lady Iosefina? For breaking Uncle Isco's heart, and for going away. Sam called her a villain. Ah, Princess Oleana said. Samati was her son. Sam is very loyal to Isco, but we mustn't blame Lady Iosefina for marrying another. Why not? Because it was not done out of spite, Princess Oleana told her, or unkindness. We love whom we love, Hanali. The choice is rarely our own. But Uncle Isco is Lord Protector, and he's not here because he's sad. Who's going to protect us? Princess Oleana laughed. Are we not strong women, able to protect ourselves? She dabbed the corners of her mouth with the cloth. Even if we were not, we are surrounded by guards, including Captain Arrow, my dear. They have machetes. She returned the cloth to her lap. Don't worry about Isco. He'll come home when he's ready. Now, I believe you have Kalama well in hand. What about Olafat? Hanali broke off a piece of sweetbread and dipped it into her utu soup, which she had forced herself to eat. She did not like the utu fruit, it tasted bad, but any complaint would bring about a lecture about privilege and the plight of those less fortunate. Still, she could not be imagining it. This soup tasted even worse than usual, bitter and crunchy. Someone had forgotten to remove all the fruit seeds. Across the small table, Princess Oleana watched Hanali struggle to finish her supper, lips twitching. Olafat, Hanali repeated after swallowing hard, is the father of all sea gods. His eldest daughter is Teriso, the octopus goddess, and his eldest son is Taga, god of sea dragons. Taga is just one of the names used by the sea dragon god. What are the others? Princess Oleana reached for a cup filled with coconut water. Hanali had climbed the tree herself just this morning. With Princess Oleana looking on, she had twisted a single coconut free, later peeling away the husk and breaking open the shell with a sharp rock. It had been another lesson in self-reliance. Hanali poked about the utu with her spoon, thinking hard. He goes by Taga, Hehu, Satawal, Cat. Do I really have to finish my soup? There were seeds in it. Princess Oleana froze. Seeds? Hanali bit down on a mouthful of seeds. The crunching sound was unmistakable. See? Princess Oleana slapped Hanali's bowl off the table. It went sailing into the air, splintering onto the stone floor. Cold soup everywhere. Hanali shot up and cried, What is? And stopped, looking on in horror. Princess Oleana had swayed to her feet, clutching the table for support. In the span of seconds, sweat had beaded her forehead and the whites of her eyes had turned a terrifying shade of red. The bat tattooed on her arm had faded to gray. She clutched her throat with one hand and said with difficulty, Hana, find help, before crumbling to the floor, eyes wide open. Hanali screamed and screamed as she ran, but just as she reached the door, her legs stopped all on their own. They felt heavy, like stone statues, and a wave of dizziness overcame her. She stumbled against the door, banging her head on the wood. Using her last bit of strength, she opened the door and fell through it, landing on the wood floor, cold against her cheek. Her eyes drifted shut to the sound of running feet. She heard Captain Arrow shouting. Another person yelled her name. It was Sam, her friend, lifting her up, holding her close. 3 sharp knocks woke her. When she dragged the tub away and tested the door, she found that the outer bolt had been lifted. The passageway was empty, so she followed her nose up to the deck where a cooking station had been set up. Pork, rice, and strips of papaya sizzled in pans. 2 dragoners, one male and one female, slapped food into bowls and made sure no one took more than their share. Others gathered in small groups, eating quickly and speaking in low tones or clearing the deck from storm debris. No one paid any attention to Hanali, but they fell silent when Moa came through the hatch. Bloodshot eyes, hair uncombed, he looked as if he had spent an even worse night than she had. Moa spoke to her without stopping. Stay out of his way. She knew that already. Hanali had to look up to find Captain Bragadin, who stood on the forecastle roof, another spyglass in hand. She went to the rail to see what had captured his attention. The sea dragons had not been lost in the typhoon. They were in front of the ship this time, pinpricks in the distance, blue and green, heading west. It was a simple thing to steer clear of Captain Bragadin. Over the next few days, they rarely lost sight of the sea dragons, which meant he had no use of her. He kept to the forecastle or to his cabin. His mood following the sinking of the lagoon was even more mercurial than before. The dragoners summoned to his presence did not come away unscathed. It was not uncommon to hear shouting or furniture breaking against walls. It could not have helped his temper to realize that they were being followed by 2 more dragon ships. Hanali stayed out of everyone's way, in her cabin with her father's papers and her notes, or in some forgotten pocket of the ship, and helping when she was told. You've done this before. The dragoner's name was Papit. He was an islander in his middle years, a big man with wild curly hair. It framed his head like a halo, like a full moon. The tattoo on his arm was of Rakakalan design. Bold sun rays drawn with heavy ink, like Vea's. I have, Hanali said, so many times she could do it in her sleep. It was afternoon out on the deck. The sun was pleasant, the waters calm. Hanali held a clay pitcher filled with dragon oil. Before her was a jar made of sea glass, a cloth square pulled tightly across its opening. Papit held the cloth in place as Hanali poured the oil onto it slowly, so that it did not flow down over the sides. The cloth acted as a sieve, preventing dirt and sand from entering and catching tiny bits of dragon bone. What settled in the jar was pure dragon oil. From the anemone, it would find its way to harbor markets, sold to make ointments and soap, and to light lamps and torches throughout Nomi Nomi. All around them, dragoners engaged in similar work, though it had been all they had been at it all day. Though Captain Bragdon had unloaded the 3 sea dragons at Kalama in a hurry, he had kept back a portion of their fat, preferring his methods for harvesting the oil. By the main mast, Moa and a female dragoner fed large strips of blubber into cauldrons, massive pots that had to be stirred using oar-sized spoons. The smell was horrendous. Hanali was glad to be on this side of the deck, away from the stench and fumes. Papit sat on a stool across from Hanali. When the jar was full, he tossed the cloth into a bucket. Who are your people, girl? You don't sound like a Rakakalan. That's because I'm not. Her satchel hung behind her, cumbersome, but she would not leave it behind in her cabin. Papit waited. When no further explanation was forthcoming, asked, So, where are you from? Salamasina? No. Wakeo? Hanalei selected another empty jar and set it before her. I'm from nowhere. Huh. Papit snagged a fresh cloth from a nearby mat. Like the rest of us, then. Several feet away, the boy dragoner ant glared in her direction. As though it was her fault entirely, his fingers were crushed and his bandage stained with dragon oil, as if he had done nothing at all to deserve it. Hanali ignored him. They had not docked at Messina to kick him off the ship, as the captain had originally intended. Like her, he knew too much. The red-bearded dragon stomped over and dumped an armful of glass jars onto the mat. They clanked alarmingly. His face was flushed with anger as he said, to no one in particular, Stay away from Vea, the mean old cat. What's with her? Vea was steering the wheel. Her eyes were narrowed on the red-bearded dragon, lips curled as though ready to spit. What did you say to her? Someone asked. Nothing, the red-bearded dragon sat on a stool, so low his knees almost reached his chin. I wanted to know about Prince Augustus, that's all. What should I tell people if they ask? Quiet fell. Even Hanali stopped pouring, marveling at his dimness. But Pete said, You're new here, Redbeard, so listen. We don't know anything about that yellow-haired prince or his granny. Never saw them. I've known the captain a long time. The rules are we do what we're told. We keep our mouth shut. We live long lives. But your mouth shut, Papit repeated. Lucky for you, Vea didn't feed you to the dragons. There were murmurs of agreement. She won't keep her mouth shut. Ant sneered across the mat at Hanali. The captain's gonna feed her to the dragons. Papit reached around the red-bearded dragon and smacked the boy on the back of his head. Ow! Everyone knows that, boy. No need to say it out loud. Papit glanced over at Hanali, spread his palms. Apologies for the youth. Hanali eyed Papit with dark humor. His rudeness? That's what you're apologizing for? Not her death by the captain's hands, which he would pretend he did not see. Papit placed the cloth tight over the pitcher. Lips pressed in a prim line. Good manners are important. Accepted, Hanali said, because she knew it would irritate Ant, which it did. He rubbed his sore head and turned his back on sore head and turned his back on her. What sort of name was Ant anyway? Short for Anthony? Or had his parents shown foresight into their son's character and named him after vermin? More hours passed. Moa lit the first of deck lanterns as the sun began to descend. The work would continue well into the night. Hanali started to pour oil into a fresh jar. She stopped, her breath catching. When she shoved the pitcher at Papit, he was so surprised he nearly dropped it. Hanali went to stand by the railing, leaning out as far as she could, inhaling deeply. A full minute passed before Redbeard said, Hey, what's that smell? Is that cake? Nutmeg, Hanali thought. Clove, cinnamon, mace, all growing on the mountains outside Tamarin City, her birthplace. The girl smelled it before then, Tamarin murmured, so that's where she's from. Then, that's the Tamarin archipelago. We won't see it until early morning, but we know it's there from way out here. They're not called the Spice Islands for nothing. Hanali had sailed this route several times over the last 4 years, never stopping. There was no reason to, but every pass bruised her heart. Her mother was buried on Tamarind, though Hanali had no memory of her. Her grandparents were buried there and their parents, 600 years of family, and Princess Oleana, who had taken a motherless girl in hand and shown her kindness and strength. She was on Tamarind too. Besides her father, Hanali had loved her most of all. It was one thing to pretend she was from nowhere. It was another to understand exactly where she came from and know she could never return. No one yelled at her to get back to work, so Hanali stayed where she was, her gaze sweeping from the sea dragons to the setting sun to the two dragon ships trailing in their wake. It was as she was watching those ships that she spotted a small boat hanging off the very back of the anemone. It swayed gently in the wind and was secured by rope. Her mind raced. Dragoners didn't normally carry rowboats. Unlike explorers or trading ships, she had not thought to look for one. Don't think about it. Captain Bragadin appeared by her side, making her jump. He looked terrible, worse even than Moa. Purple smudges framed his eyes. Heavy stubble covered his face. He had the appearance of someone who slept too little and drank too much, which was what most people would do if they had just firebombed the Esperanza King's mother and his youngest son. The conversation behind them had dropped off considerably. The others were listening. Hanali said, I was thinking about the sunset. I don't blame you. It's a beautiful one. Captain Bragadin leaned his arms on the railing. We're docking at Tamarind, he said, looking over in time to see her flinch. The typhoons put holes in the hull. We need to be repaired or they'll get bigger. It will be a short visit, he emphasized. That prince isn't overly fond of me. Better if he doesn't know I'm there. Sam. There was only one prince of Tamarind. It felt strange to hear the captain speak of him, strange and dangerous. What did you do to him? You assume it's my fault, not his, Captain Bragadin said dryly. It was a misunderstanding, but the boy holds a grudge. He gave her an appraising glance. You knew him well, I suppose, being his mother's page. I didn't. Really? Pages didn't spend much time with princes, Hanley lied without hesitation. What the captain knew, he used against you eventually. She steered the conversation into safer waters. What will you do with the dragon fruit? You can't bring Prince Augustus back from the dead. A snort. I'll only have 3 eggs. Why would I waste one on him or the old woman? 3. So much for giving her one. How did he think to get out of this? He could not keep what he had done a secret. Someone on this dragoner would talk, deliberately, for a price, or accidentally, like that red-bearded dragon was bound to do. Red-bearded dragoner was bound to do. The moment the Esperanzan king learned what had been done to his family, Captain Bragadin would become the hunted, no longer the hunter. Unless the ship, his crew. What was she thinking? He did not need a dragon's egg to solve his particular problem. He only needed to be rid of his ship and those on it. Not such a difficult task. He had done something similar only days ago. It had taken minutes. You're too smart for your own good. Captain Bragadin had been watching her. And your face too expressive sometimes. He turned back to the water. You'll remain in your cabin while we're docked, under guard. Don't do anything foolish. I wasn't going to. Good, because it will not work. First, you have to get to the rowboat without being seen. He glanced behind him at the dragoners spread about the deck. Dozens of them, all with their eyes down and working diligently. He looked over at Moa, who had finished lighting the lanterns, and now watched over everything from the forecastle roof. Moa nodded his head once in acknowledgement. Which is unlikely, Captain Bragadin continued. Then you would have to cut the ropes, but you have no dagger, no knife. Even if you manage that, our harpoons carry a long way. And maybe you've forgotten, but there are monsters in the water. In the water, right beside her. Monsters everywhere. Never let him see you're frightened. Hanley stared straight ahead. I haven't forgotten. Good, Captain Bragadin said. He walked off, then turned back and said, for her ears alone, there's nothing for you on Tamarind, Hanley. Your family's dead. You're all alone. No one's coming for you.